Hey y'all, how's it going? Did you know that in the California alcohol industry, that if a retailer, so let's say a liquor store, a bar, a grocery store, any place that sells alcohol, that if they don't pay their vendor or distributor within 30 days of delivery of product, um, they're actually in violation of what's called tied house laws and tied house restrictions. So by law in California, all all alcohol retailers have to pay their distributor or their supplier or vendor within 30 days of the product being delivered. Um, and for alcohol, why that was set up was it was anti-monopoly rules because if a particular alcohol brand wanted to extend credit to the retailer, like say, hey, you don't have to pay me for 6 months for the product I delivered, that would be actually an unfair business practice for. So let's say I'm just going to use some brands that we're all familiar with, not saying they're doing this, but so you can understand. So if Budweiser came into a bar and said, we will basically front you all of our Anheuser-Busch Budweiser alcohol products, and we'll extend 6 months credit, so you don't have to pay us for 6 months. And then let's say Sierra Nevada beer came along and said, yeah, we want you to sell our beer at your establishment as well. And then the bar said, well, can you give us 6 months credit? And they're like, no, we can't do that. We need to get paid, within 30 days. That would be an unfair business practice, a monopoly type practice, where Budweiser is using a thing of value, a line of credit, as an unfair business practice to squeeze out the smaller microbrews or mid-size beer suppliers. So, so in California for decades, it has been illegal for that retailer to not pay the vendor or distributor within 30 days. And in California, if it goes beyond a certain point, like beyond 42 days, you actually get into fines, and then you may actually even lose your license, and you still have to start paying COD. So now in cannabis, so if we had that same law, it wouldn't necessarily be for anti-competition reasons, but because one of the biggest problems with the cannabis industry right now is that retailers are not paying their vendors, especially within 30 days. Um, and it's actually creating an unfair market because the really big vendors, the really big brands can wait longer than 30 days to get paid, where the smaller vendors need to get paid, more quickly because they've got less capital in their operating costs. They need to keep paying their bills. So it's actually monopolistic anti-competition to allow retailers to not pay their vendors within 30 days. So what really needs to happen, it's amazing. There are so many similarities between the alcohol industry and cannabis, and I'm not saying they're the same thing, should be handled completely the same, but there's so many laws that have already evolved as safeguards to keep the market healthy and diverse within the alcohol industry, that if we applied those same laws to cannabis, it would solve so many of the problems that are going on right now. So and one of them is, and again, look up tied house restrictions, and you'll see that one of the main tenets is that you actually, the retailers have to pay the vendor within 30 days. Or they start getting fined and actually have their license revoked, and it can actually be a misdemeanor. So, yeah, if we had that simple rule in the cannabis industry, where if a retailer didn't pay someone like myself, a small vendor, so if I delivered product and they didn't pay me within 30 days, that retailer could actually start getting fined and actually lose their license and actually be forced to pay COD to all their vendors, COD, cash on delivery. That would clear up so many problems within the cannabis industry, and then that would allow someone like myself, a small vendor, supplier, to have another layer of security that I could maybe expand our market, because we have tons of dispensaries contacting us all the time that want to carry our Jade Nectar tinctures. So we're a small business, but the risk of not getting paid by that retailer is so high, and right now the retailers there's no repercussions for them not paying you. In fact, there's been a lot of retailers who have admitted that that's a strategy. They intentionally do not pay their small vendors. They just steal the product because they can get away with it. So that's something to contemplate right now. And I know there's been attempts in the cannabis industry to create these, they're not calling it tied house rules, but they're basically just copying what's already there in the alcohol industry. But those bills to try and force retailers to pay within the first 30 days of the product being delivered, or risk having their license revoked, right now those bills get killed almost immediately. So there's a big question: why is that happening? Who is fighting those? Who's against those? And in reality, bigger operators, bigger suppliers, bigger vendors, bigger brands are actually using that line of credit as an unfair business practice, and they're also allowing more small businesses to get burned and go out of business. So right now there's no safety nets and safeguards for the small businesses. So we're heading towards monopolies in the cannabis industry. That's going to be the big MSO brands, because they can weather the storm if they don't get paid by a retailer. A smaller brand, a few dispensaries don't pay them, and that could be really catastrophic. So that's allowing that safety net has not been put in place to make sure that those small vendors get paid within 30 days. And again, I'm not making this up. These laws have been on the books for decades and decades in California. And in fact, this year, they just passed another law for alcohol where the retailer has to now pay. It's required that they have to pay through ACH, or through electronic payment. So it's actually recorded to make sure nobody's sort of cheating the system and illegally extending longer than 30-day line of credit to some suppliers. So this is common sense practice. This is just one of many laws that exist in the alcohol industry. And again, because the alcohol industry and cannabis have a lot of similarities, we should really be tapping into these existing alcohol laws that are already on the books to protect and allow for smaller businesses to thrive. So when you think alcohol, we have Budweiser and these big Coors and all these huge brands. But in our California alcohol market, we also have very small wineries. We have artisan wineries. We actually have wine tasting and direct sales. We also have microbreweries, where they're allowed to sell their own beer at their facility. But then also, when those small wineries and those small brewers sell their product to retailers, they're guaranteed by law they have to get paid in full within 30 days. That would be a game changer in cannabis. And that would provide a massive safety net for small cannabis operators if we guaranteed were required to be paid within 30 days, or that retailer would, if they didn't pay within 42 days, then it really starts getting pretty gnarly for that retailer, where they start getting fines, they could lose their license, and they could even be charged with a misdemeanor. So that's the kind of teeth we need in the cannabis industry. And now the question is, though, why is no one fighting for these tied house restrictions in cannabis? And there just doesn't seem to be a lot of love coming the way of the small cannabis producer right now. Then this gets into a whole nother topic of just the California cannabis industry being extremely anti-small business, anti-small farmer. And this goes right to the top of California political system. And it's strange. Right now we have a governor who actually, before getting into politics, ran and still owns boutique artisan wine shops, and also owns a bunch of wineries that are considered small wineries. So our governor knows all too well, this is his professional field, is the small artisan boutique wine and spirits business. So it's very aware of these laws there to protect small alcohol businesses. And why aren't those same laws and protections being applied within the California cannabis industry? And those are good questions. Anyway, but look it up. Look up Tied House, TIED House laws, California alcohol industry, and you'll see it's required to pay within 30 days. So that would be game changer for cannabis, for small business. All right. Bye.